cover page of a submission I made to a Gurdjieff website. Your home page states, "And all cosmic truths usually become known to all these planets, thanks to the fact that the beings of the given planet, who by their conscious labors learn some truth or other, share it with other beings of their planet. And in this way, all the cosmic truths gradually become known by all the beings of the given planet without any distinction." Unquote. Quote from Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, page 563. So it is I wish to share. And what is it I wish to share? I wish to share a new perspective of the diagram of everything living. The new perspective: 1. A first ever presentation of a three-dimensional model of the diagram of everything living. 2. The ever-spiraling nature of the diagram of everything living. 3. A new perspective of man in the silence, man standing between World 1 and World 2. 4. How the laws of 3 and 7 can be found acting as the foundation of the diagram of everything living. 5. How the silence completes the diagram of everything living. 6. How the diagram of everything living validates man's divinity. 7. The importance of the silence of attaining level 4 and becoming man, number 4. And might I add, quote, "A new knowledge is necessary, a knowledge that can lead to a new understanding of man and to a change in being, that is, to evolution." Quote from The Reality of Being by Jeannie de Salzman. A three-dimensional model of everything living. Understanding the silence has much more to offer us other than simply quietude. Understanding the silence opens up venues of a new understanding regarding a three-dimensional model of everything living, as opposed to our present two-dimensional understanding regarding the diagram of everything living. This three-dimensional model of the diagram of everything living interprets into a greater understanding of our true essence, as well as a greater understanding of reality too, and how the two are interconnected. Jeannie de Salzman says in The Reality of Being, quote, "Until now my awareness has not been true consciousness. I have been living only with my ordinary functions. Now I know I can go further. I can reach a deeper level in myself. And at certain moments I succeed in touching my essence, as though feeling a new center of gravity. This essence is like a newborn child that I have to nourish and strengthen. It is here that I need to concentrate, to hold myself in my work. More and more I feel a need for the spiritual in me, the spirit to penetrate and transform me. Yet the passage is not free. But when I see and feel it, a kind of suffering arises, a feeling of lack, of insufficiency. Do I accept being in front of this insufficiency, or do I, in fact, refuse?" Unquote. From The Reality of Being. Assembling the pieces of the diagram of everything living. in a three-dimensional format. The diagram of everything living with knowledge becomes a three-dimensional model and an evolutionary spiral. Below is the table of contents of this presentation. Introduction. The ancients told us, the diagram of everything living has much to tell us in terms of understanding ourselves, both as individuals and as a species. The technique most commonly used to study the diagram of everything living orients around displaying the diagram of everything living and then discussing the displayed diagram. Since this technique has been used extensively already, we will take a different approach. The approach taken within this work will construct the diagram of everything living piece by piece and examine the results of the process as we go. So where do we begin? We're going to begin with the upper box of the diagram of everything living as opposed to the lower box where most analysis begins. We will begin with the absolute. Topic: the absolute. Absolute truth 1. The absolute is defined by, quote, the absolute is the concept of an unconditional reality which transcends limited conditional everyday experience. It is sometimes used as an alternative term for God or the divine, especially, but by no means exclusively, by those who feel that the term God lends itself too easily to anthropomorphic presumptions. The concept of the absolute may or may not, depending upon one's specific doctrine, possess discrete will, intelligence, awareness, or a personal nature. It is sometimes conceived of as the source through which all being emanates. It contrasts with finite things, considered individually and known collectively as the relative. This is the reflection in its Latin origin absolutus, which means loosened from or unattached. This, quote unquote, comes from wikipedia.com. The absolute in the most simplistic language becomes defined as will, intent, the ability to be, potentiality, being, as in the passive verb form. This is not to say the absolute is simply passive in nature, for the absolute is active, passive, and neutral. The absolute is without form, is ethereal in nature. The absolute represents the first stage or last stage of World 2, depending, as we shall see, upon one's relativistic point of view. Is a world without time, without space, without matter, a world without suns, galaxies, planets, and without a form of life as we find it within the physical universe, as we find it within the cosmos, as we find it within World 1. Quote from In Search of the Miraculous. Further passing to philosophical conclusions, we may say that all worlds must form some, for us, incomprehensible and unknown whole, or one, as an apple is one. This whole, or one, or all, which may be called the absolute, or the independent, because including everything within itself, it is not dependent upon anything, is world for all worlds. Diagramming the absolute, we symbolically, not in terms of ancient symbols, but simply in terms of a depiction as represented in the diagram of everything living. Figure 2, the absolute. In the formal diagram of everything living, numbers and symbols are inserted within the diagram boxes. The numbers within the diagram of everything living are not the focus of this chapter, not the focus of this work. As such, we are going to ignore the number values and symbols placed within the diagram of everything living and focus upon the diagram of everything living itself. The focus upon the interrelationship existing between man in the cosmos, world 1, and man in the ethereal, world 2. The point of this work is to understand one's true self and the whole of reality. Eternally Unchanging, Topic 2, Absolute Truth 2. Below the diagram of the absolute is a square representing the eternally unchanging. But what constitutes an existence which is eternally unchanging? The issue would appear to be a complex issue, but appearances are deceiving. Personal note. The issue is no more complex than the pre-Einstein era of understanding that matter and energy were not interconnected. Even as late as the 1950s, high school physics books stated two separate principles of physics, namely the conservation of matter. Matter could not be created or destroyed, and independent of the conservation of matter, the conservation of energy. Energy could not be created or destroyed. It took Albert Einstein to unravel the complexity of the issue regarding the connection of matter and energy through his introduction regarding the interrelationship of matter and energy. Einstein introduced a simplistic formula, namely E equals mc squared. The equation is a combination of three letters, a mathematical symbol, and an exponent. This equation generated a paradigm shift for physics, which would propel humanity to a whole new level of scientific, philosophical, and religious perceptions. Great enough to lift our species up a complete step along the ladder of our evolutionary development as a species, namely the atomic age. Complexity does not lead to paradigm shifts capable of transforming, propelling humanity up the spiral of our evolutionary development. It is simplicity which does so. And it is simplicity which arises out of the complexity of the material found within this article. Due to a restriction of time, the details regarding the question, what constitutes an existence which is eternally unchanging, will have to wait for another discussion. For now, let us just agree to follow contemporary thinking and state the eternally unchanging is God, and/or is omniscience, all-knowing, omnipotence, all-powerful, and omnipresence, all-presence, and/or is the creator of World 1, the physical universe, and/or is Brahma, and/or is Jehovah, and/or etc. Diagramming the eternally unchanging, as is done in the diagram of everything living, we obtain Figure 3. Combining the absolute and the eternally unchanging, we begin to generate the diagram of everything living, as shown in Figure 4. Individuality, Absolute Truth 3. Man enters the picture. Made in the image of God. End of quote. Sparks of the divine, children of God, particles of the whole. Whatever or however it is one wishes to define ourselves as individuals, as described by ancient texts throughout humanity's evolutionary spiral, to understand itself and other ethereal entities of reality. We now come to the concept of the individual. Quote, I am a particle of the highest. Through sensation, I can know this. We can know God only through sensation. End of quote. From The Reality of Being by Jeannie de Salzman, page 226. Diagramming individuality, we obtain figure 5. The Absolute and the Eternally Unchanging are recognized as being existences in a holistic sense. The concept of Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, does not interfere with the concept of unity regarding God, for the Trinity speaks of the three in one. Combining the absolute and eternally unchanging and ethereal individuality, we expand the diagram of everything living and obtain figure 6. We can now proceed to examine individuality found within the ethereal. The diagram of everything living breaks down the category of ethereal individuality into 3 divisions, namely 1. Archangels, 2. Angels, and 3. Man. Quote, now on the other side of man is, this is a class of creatures which we do not know. Let us call them angels. The next square, let us call these beings archangels. End of quote. From the In Search of the Miraculous, The Teachings of Gurdjieff by P.D. Ouspensky. The 3 classes of ethereal individuality, which are presently identified in the diagram of everything living, shown in figure 7, individuality, allows us to revamp the square representing the category of individuality with the 3 classes, shown in figure 8, man, the ethereal, the angels, and the archangels. Substituting the 3 categories of individuality into figure 6 for the generic term individuality, we would obtain figure 9, with the absolute at the top, eternally unchanging underneath, and below that discrete elements of individuality, be they man the ethereal, or angels, or archangels. The horizontal elements within the diagram of everything living represents individuality, and as such, man the ethereal now makes its appearance. The 3, man the ethereal, angels, archangels, all being of the same nature of the ethereal, sparks of the whole, all being sparks of individual ethereal, could then be diagrammed as separate entities running horizontally, as shown in figure 10. Quote, it is impossible to study a system of the universe without studying a man. At the same time, it is impossible to study man without studying the universe. End of quote. Gurdjieff, quote, from In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky. Substituting the role of individuality into the diagram of everything living, previously labeled as individuality, gives us figure 11. We now have a picture form of the whole of World 2, the whole composition of the ethereal. World 2, the ethereal, the divine, the incorporeal, represents the backward L of the diagram of everything living. Figure 12 illustrates the backward L. World 2, the divine, the ethereal, the incorporeal. Changing the diagram of everything living into a three-dimensional format, we obtain... Before diagramming what we obtain, let me give a personal note here. Dimensions do not exist within the ethereal. Dimensions are an element of the physical, are an element of the world one. To suggest, however, one should not use dimensions to assist in understanding the diagram of everything living leads to the obliteration of all diagrams showing the diagram of everything living itself, since all former diagrams of the diagram of everything living make use of dimensions, are in fact two-dimensional diagrams. To proceed to a third dimension in no way diminishes what the diagram of everything living has to teach us. Rather, increasing the number of dimensions we use to understand the diagram of everything living increases what we can learn from examining the diagram of everything living. Thus proceeding, we obtain Figure 13, which shows the three-dimensional view of the upper part of the diagram of everything living. We are now ready to consider World 1.